Hello. Thank you so much, Eunice. Yes, my name is Devyn Keith, and I have the unique, blessed opportunity to now be conversing with my heroes. This is a big moment for me. I am the president of the Huntsville City Council, the greatest city just this side of heaven in the state of Alabama. And for the next foreseeable 45, maybe even an hour, we'll be discussing some very important topics with people that I look up to, I confide in, who are heroes to me as a public servant. So as I call them, many of them, or hopefully all of them, are people that you know. I first like to introduce Miss Stacey Abrams. My Shiro, hello, how are you?
I am excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Recent Democratic nominee. I just want to give you a quick 2 seconds, if you could. I know it's tough for all of us to do so. Just give us a 2 or 3 second introduction of yourself, what you got going on. Let the world know what's going on currently in your life.
Stacey Abrams, former Democratic leader, former nominee for governor in the state of Georgia. I'm the founder and chair of Fair Fight, founder of Fair Count, and the executive director and founder of the Southern Economic Advancement Project.
And that was a very condensed version because you could have went on and on and on and on. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, we will have another hero of mine, a lady running for senator. We're going to call her future senator, Miss Amy McGrath. Well, hello.
Hi.
From Alabama.
Yeah.
Welcome. I just want to give you a quick 2 seconds. If you could introduce yourself to everybody in the world.
Well, I'm Amy McGrath. I'm a native Kentuckian and spent most of my adult life in the United States Marine Corps, serving the country. Loved every minute of that. And I am now the Democratic nominee to take on Senator Mitch McConnell here in Kentucky and replace him. Yes, thank you. Because, he's really bad for our country.
Yes.
We're working very hard and, we've got 4 months to go to change the country for the better.
Thank you. And it's a blessing to have you. And I'm excited to hear more about that in the next coming minutes. Next, I would like to introduce my mentor, my brother from another, my hero, and the 30th mayor of the second greatest city in Alabama, Mr. Randall Woodfin.
Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be among some distinguished guests and just so proud of this moment for city of Birmingham and our country.
Thank you, man. You never miss a moment to look clean, man. I guess I should have worn my tie. Good to see you again, brother.
You too, man.
And then finally, last but not least, one of the greatest senators this state has seen, somebody who has been in every way a supporter of what's going on in the city of Huntsville, and personally has been a success in support of some of the things that we've been working on in this city, our Senator Doug Jones.
Hey, my friends, how's everybody? Thanks
Welcome,
for having me
man.
today.
Thank you. Well, we've made our introductions, and we just want to give you a chance to make your introduction as well. We're excited to have you on, Senator. If you want to give a couple of minutes to let the world know who this young man is.
Well, I'm hardly a young man anymore these days, and it seems like I'm aging more every day. But I'm Doug Jones. I'm the U.S. Senator from the great state of Alabama. Grew up, born and bred in Alabama. Went to Alabama school systems, and I was a lawyer and was United States Attorney. I started working in the Senate in 1979 and 1980 for the late, great Howell Heflin, who I hold his seat. Was an assistant U.S. Attorney and later had the honor of serving as the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama there in Birmingham, and did some great things, and then was elected to the U.S. Senate in a special election in 2017.
Thank you, Senator. Well, we're going to jump right into it. I am, if you haven't noticed, starstruck, to say the least. This is a blessing for somebody as young/old as me to be having a conversation, but more so to listen and learn. Feel free at any point. They're going to get mad at me, but I'm going to be jumping around asking them personal questions because I get some leadership qualities from you all. And we're going to be talking about things that I imagine you've talked about a number of times on a number of video calls, personal, as well as in your political points and conversations as well. But we'll start with Miss Stacey. And if you don't mind, one of the things I noticed, and we'll talk about it as we develop, everybody else can jump in as well. In this coming election, one of the things you've always fought for is everybody being counted. Having received the largest amount of votes in the history of your state. One of the important things that we've pushed is the census tracking and understanding the impact that that has on gerrymandered districts. What are some of the things that you see coming up in the upcoming election that are important for people, whether that's a nonprofit like your own or others, to be aware of, and that could have impact positively on the election coming up in November?
Thank you so much, Councilman. I want to remind people that as much as we are, getting a redo of the 2016 election, which is critical, we have to remember that we're also fighting the 2010 election. And just as they did in 2010, the Republicans are intent on undoing the democratic, and I use small d, democratic efforts of citizens by using the census process to gerrymander our states. And in the South, this is particularly dangerous because there is the intent by the President of the United States to unconstitutionally exclude undocumented persons from the census count. While there are those who would argue that they shouldn't be counted, that's not how the Constitution works. And Senator Jones can tell you this. The Constitution says you count every person here because once they're here, there are certain constitutional prerogatives of protection to which they are entitled. And if we do not count them, then they will not be included in the judgments that we make when we send money to cities and counties and states. They will not be included when we have to make decisions about where we have to deploy resources. And to gerrymandering, the challenge is that the intent is to use this miscount, this intentional miscount, to redraw the lines in several states so that they do not have to comply with the racial gerrymandering prohibition that remains in the Constitution. So we have to keep our eye on the prize. We've got to make certain that we reelect Doug Jones, that we elect Amy McGrath, but we cannot ignore voting down ballot, making sure that we elect state legislators who understand the importance of the census. But that also means every person has to complete the census, especially those who are most afraid of it. They want you to be afraid because they want you to be ignored.
Beautiful. And Senator, I think you could probably piggyback very well off that. Stacey has led that conversation years, almost it seems like a decade nationally, in that conversation of awareness in your state, particularly. That's going to have a huge impact. How do you see that coming up in your election, and the importance of letting people know being counted is important as well, but also being aware of state legislators about gerrymandering districts?
Was that one to me?
Yes, sir.
Look, the census is the all-important thing right now. You only have to look at what has happened in Alabama and where we are with a state legislature that has been so gerrymandered. There is a veto proof. Even if our governor wanted to veto it, she couldn't be overridden. We've had it in all manner of things. Right there in Birmingham, in Jefferson County, we've got gerrymandered districts that prohibit, I think, adequate voting of minorities in our county commission and adequate voting strength in our county commission. We've got to do all of that. In Alabama, we are in serious danger of losing a congressional seat. That is a big deal, folks. Even if it is a Republican seat or a Democratic seat, we're going to lose a seat in Congress. We lose an electoral vote. That's all important as well. We've got to make sure that we do everything that we can. So much federal money, as Stacey said, comes into the states based on census. And it is just nonsensical to try to prohibit people or try to stop people, whoever they are, from registering with the census. We need to get everybody registered. Right now in Alabama, I looked at the stats the other day. We're a little bit behind where we were. Of course, the pandemic and our healthcare crisis has probably got us behind. We need to step up all our efforts right now because it's incredibly important to everyone.
Right. And Senator Jones, in 2017, we were all knocking doors. And Amy, this question is for you. He had the ability to just really find local ingestion of people knocking doors, really starting that historic run for Senator Jones that was swept across the nation. We're looking to do that same thing with you and really garnering what potentially will be another historic election in your state. How is absentee? We know you've tweeted out about absentee ballots. How do you see, with everybody being counted, the importance of, at even the lowest level, letting people know the importance of getting the opportunity to vote?
Well, it's so important. You know, in the primary in Kentucky, we learned a lot of lessons, and you know, we had this no excuse absentee voting for the primary, but there were a lot of problems with it. I mean, we had, Jefferson County where for some time you couldn't get an absentee ballot. The state had a portal, but the portal wasn't up. And if you wanted a ballot, you had to call your county clerk. And for some of these counties that are heavily populated, the county clerks, just were overwhelmed. And a lot of it is we just didn't have the resources to get people the ballots that they needed, so that they didn't have to risk their life in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that's what this comes down to. I'm certainly pushing for the fall to have no excuse absentee voting, because the coronavirus doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon. Unfortunately, in Kentucky, we just passed a voter ID law here. So that doesn't make it any easier. We have to have no excuse voting. And I know that we can absentee voting. I know that we can do it. I voted absentee my entire career in the military. It works just fine. We can do this, but we need the resources to do it. I know that the federal government has only allocated maybe about a tenth of the resources that we need right now for the states to do this, because there's a lot of planning involved. We have 120 counties in Kentucky. They all do something differently, and they need the resources to be able to plan for an election in the fall. That's, you're going to have 2 to 3 times the amount of people trying to vote in this fall. And that's so important. People shouldn't have to risk their lives.
Absolutely. And in mentioning Jefferson County, Mayor, I don't think mayors right now get enough shine on what you have to manage between COVID, really public interaction, and you have made national news of always trying to interact with everybody from Montgomery to Washington. How do you see that unrolling as a mayor? And what are some of the things that you've seen as importance, not only access to voting rights, but as we talk about COVID and its interaction in municipal races, which are just as important as the federal races? How have you and your office really dealt with the transactional issues that might occur, and you've started to preemptively get ready for that action proactively?
Well, listen, I think since day one for us, as early as March, every decision we made was through the lens of saving lives, protecting lives, and making sure we found a way to decrease the spread. I think if you attach that same mindset to the upcoming election in November, it's important, the decisions we make, even at the local level, even if we can't control for how elections are run, because that's predicated on the state, and working with the county, we got to make sure the space that's granted is safe enough for our residents to feel safe enough to come out if other options are not available to them. That same mindset is no different from every decision we've made here locally, dealing with the coronavirus since March. When I think back to March, when this crisis first began, the sad part for me was that there was no, united front from the federal government. And then if you couldn't get it from there, you wanted to get it from the state, at least as it related to the 169 cities across the state of Alabama and our 67 counties. But cities have been left to our own, to fend for ourselves as it relates to making the best decision for our residents. And so for every decision we make, it's important that we remain in lockstep with the health experts on the ground locally, our Jefferson County health officer, as well as the leadership at UAB Hospital, making sure any information they're giving to us in real time and the recommendations they're giving to us, we act on them.
Absolutely. I mean, we're dealing with that locally too. And again, you do a really good job of having that cohesion between the city council and addressing something that has actually swept the nation in conversation. And Ms. Stacey, maybe you can allude to this as a state rep in conversation in the state of Georgia, understanding that mayors have a lot of power. And the impact right now we're having in conversations is people now realizing that mayors have a lot of power when it comes to police reform, police appointments, police interactions. What do you see as importance of letting people know that not just voting on the national level, but the importance of voting for a state legislator or even their mayor, and the impact that happens in the trickle up effect of the accountability of police brutality and the impact that it has on police reform?
I think it's critical that we understand that we can't stop at the top. That's one of the slogans we use. As a state legislator, I was always imploring members of my district, my constituents, to understand that most of the decisions that help or hurt them didn't come from DC. They came from Atlanta. They came from the Capitol. And when I ran for governor, I put a very fine point on it by pointing out that stand your ground was not a federal law that came out of Florida. The erosion of the public safety net didn't happen in 1996 with Bill Clinton. It happened in the late 80s with Tommy Thompson, the governor of Wisconsin. Mass incarceration didn't start in 94 with the crime bill. It started with Governor Ronald Reagan in California. And lest we forget, Jim Crow never had a single federal law. And so we have to understand the importance of local legislation, particularly in this crisis of justice that we're having. And it is mayors like Mayor Woodfin who are doing the work, mayors here in Georgia and around the country who have to not only do the work, but who have to stand and demand that they be held accountable. And that's why I'm so proud of the work that Mayor Woodfin is doing. We know that across this country, it is DAs that determine whether or not someone is actually charged. It is judges who determine the length of the sentence. And yes, it is the police. The police are determined. They are led by the mayors of our cities and by the sheriffs in our counties. And so we can't exempt anyone. But that also means that accountability has to be both ways, creating space for citizen review boards, holding up those ordinances that are being used as a predicate for taking people and taking them into the justice system without actually intending to provide them with justice. And so I urge everyone to think about the fact that we live whole lives. We don't live single strand lives. And that's the same thing is true when it comes to our laws. If we want to tackle the systemic racism, the systemic inequities, and the structural brutality that is built into our criminal justice system, we have to pay attention to every level, starting with the level that is closest to the people.
Amen. Couldn't say it better. And maybe Senator Jones, we could piggyback in that way. One of the issues that happens in the state of Alabama is that a sheriff will continually run, a DA will continually run. We know that there's a need for ADA reform. There's no minorities in the ADA. We have issues with our probate. But the issue that happens is when somebody goes in that booth, and you've discussed it many times, and just vote straight ticket. What do you see in the reform that is needed for that consideration and conversation around straight ticket? And for you being introduced to the state of Alabama, having dealt with a monumental case, how do you see that reform happening if individuals like yourself have access and ability to bring legislation through Congress that will trickle down to states like Alabama?
Yeah, on the straight ticket voting, I think it's a matter of education. Unfortunately, I believe in the South, and Stacey suffered from this. Amy is suffering from it to the extent she did in her previous race. I have, and I will some to an extent in November. And that is, unfortunately, a lot of times over the last 20 years, Democrats didn't really play in the South, and we got kind of ignored. And therefore, we got defined not by ourselves, but we were defined by the Republicans and others. And when that happens, people get conditioned to just vote that straight ticket. And it is an issue in Alabama. We're one of only, I think, 6 states left now. And it is a problem for us. So I think what I did in my campaign in 2017 and what I've done in the Senate is to try to not talk about everything in just strictly Republican Democratic terms, but simply talk about it in kitchen table issues and what it means for jobs, what it means for the economy, and particularly in Alabama on health care. So many people need Medicaid expansion, and we didn't get it because of politics. So many people have a pre-existing condition that they have health insurance because of the ACA, and Alabama is one of the states trying to undo that. So I think that to a large extent, we've got to talk about issues, because when I talk about issues, that's what gets people's attention. When I talk about their kitchen table issues and keeping their job, making sure their kids have an education, protecting our nation's security. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and so right now we're up here talking about the National Defense Authorization. People want to keep our country safe and secure. Those are the kind of things that people can do, and we can do those things without engaging in the Republican Democratic debate. And then that way people are more apt, I think, to split tickets down the road. And then in my view, I would love to see Alabama do something about that. On what the police reform and things that are going on right now, we've got a couple of bills pending, one of which I'm a co-sponsor that Senator Harris and Senator Booker filed. It does some really good things. It does a lot of the things that Stacey was talking about just a moment ago. Unfortunately, I don't think that Amy's opponent, Senator McConnell, is going to let that come to the Senate floor. He wants a more watered down version, one that I couldn't support. And I think that we've got to do better. And when we're talking about this, though, the federal government has a role, and we can do things because we have purse strings, and we can condition grants and other things and training on doing it the right way. But at the end of the day, law enforcement and local leaders have to step up. They've got to want to see, got to want to make this. It's just like Stacey was talking about. You know, Tip O'Neill, the famous Democratic House Speaker, said all politics is local. And that's where the rubber meets the road, right there in the city of Birmingham, our local offices. And I think we're going to do a better job in the future, because what I'm seeing is there are police departments, law enforcement across this country, and they know, they understand, and they want to be law enforcement officers. They don't want to be social workers. They don't want to have to deal with all the mental health issues that we've got across this country. And so we're going to be doing what we can up here. I hope that those bills can get to the floor, because I think if we can get the Harris-Booker bill to the floor, we can get something passed. It's already passed the House of Representatives, but we got to get it to the floor. And if that means we got to wait until Senator McConnell's not a senator anymore, so be it. We just got to make it happen.
And in that way, I agree. Maybe future Senator McGrath, maybe you could speak to that, Lieutenant Colonel, of that perspective. How do you bring, other than good barbecue, to your representatives that kitchen table conversation that crosses, as Senator Jones does well, and makes that purple happen, where red and blue meet? How do you bring those issues in conversation and make it tangible beyond Breonna Taylor? How do you make those things realistic and say, as your senator, I'll address those table issues?
Yeah, it's so important. And Senator Jones said it very eloquently. We have lost a lot of our democracy when we cannot even debate issues because one man has decided, I'm not going to take that bill and put it on the floor for debate. One man has decided what the Senate will even look at. And I believe it's what is a part of what is inflaming a lot of how angry so many people are, because a lot of us want to have common sense measures to get things done, whether it's on healthcare or police reform or the minimum wage, you name it. But we have this dysfunction right now because of Mitch McConnell. And so, you know, when I talk to voters and I talk to people here in Kentucky, I'm somebody that wants to move things forward in a certain way. And I believe, for example, the minimum wage, we ought to move to $15 an hour. But, you know, maybe you think it should stay the same. And maybe somebody over there might think it should be $12. Here's the thing. We can't debate that anymore, because the very part of our government, the supposed greatest deliberative body in the world, in the US Senate, you know, it isn't functioning. And so, you know, my feeling is we've got to get our democracy back. And that's why it's so important to get rid of the man that's holding this up, to be able to move forward with some of these things. And there is, I think, a role for the federal government and for us to address things like police brutality at the federal level, because there are things that we all believe should be done, you know, banning, or most people, you know, things like making sure that we have body cameras. And Senator Jones talked about resources here. You know, that's something that the federal government can help with. Let's help with the resources so that all police organizations have those body cameras. You know, these are things that we need to do. And it's just unfortunate because we passed some things in the House. We have some really good legislation in the Senate. And Mitch McConnell either waters it down and puts the watered down version, which basically has no teeth, to the floor of the Senate, and doesn't allow debate on the floor. So this is something we got to change. And I'm just convinced that we can't do it until we get, you know, change the dynamic of what the Senate looks like.
Absolutely. And I mean, that really speaks to, again, Randall, like a month ago, set the tone in a lot of ways throughout the state by doing what you said, which was take action. I actually copied and pasted and followed suit and led a resolution that was passed here in the city of Huntsville to remove the Confederate monument from our county courthouse. Mayor Woodfin, maybe you could speak to, and I think why there's a resurgence of local municipalities getting a lot of attention nationally is because the accountability is immediate. It doesn't have Mitch McConnell blocking it. Right. What is the importance for you as a mayor and for those who are watching to understand that the actions you take are immediate for the whole of the city of Birmingham, but also in cohesion with your city council, you want to make those steps and those strides that affect every demographic possible. And every time you can't make everybody happy. I've learned that, to say the least. But how tough is that? And what is your approach when you're handling moments like that Confederate monument removal?
Well, I think there are three things to speak to that issue. The first is quite simple. We're talking about an actual city park, a city park that's owned by the city, managed by the city. City resources are the only resources responsible for operating this park. That means, to me, it's quite simple. A city should be allowed to do what it wants with its park. No state or federal government should be allowed. And quite hypocritical for some governors to talk about, we don't want the federal government in our business, but they are literally making laws that's telling the city what it can or can't do in a city park. And so that's the first thing to speak to. But the second thing to speak to is this notion of revisionist history. And when you consider revisionist history, where these statues come into play in public squares, we know the daughters of the Confederate were very intentional post the Civil War, including in a city like Birmingham that didn't even exist during the Civil War, put these things in place to display white supremacy, to display revisionist history, and a host of other things. And so I think that's the second thing to speak to. Then the third thing is this statue on its face in the public square in the city that is 74% Black, the fourth Blackest city in America. This statue symbolizes regulating Black people to property and slaves. It's wrong and it's offensive. And so for me, it's important to listen to what the residents of the city of Birmingham are saying, Black and white. And this statue didn't belong in our city. And at a time where you have a white officer placing his knee and all his weight on the neck of an unarmed Black man and snuffs the life out of him, this statue is a symbolism of all the things that's wrong in America, including not just police brutality, but racism. And I think for mayors, it is extremely important to take action even when you know laws that states create are wrong on its face, and be prepared for the consequences. As Congressman John Lewis said, I think that is the classic definition of good trouble. And I think in this instance, when we had the opportunity, when there was so much outcry in our city, like a lot of other cities in America, taking down that statue was the least I can do to let our residents know that form of symbolism of hatred did not belong anywhere in the public square of our city. And I would encourage any mayor across America to do the same thing.
Or a city council member.
Absolutely.
Get no love. Well, I think that leads to a great question. And I think as we all, show our reverence to who it was, as John Lewis, I know Ms. Stacey, you had a very close relationship with the congressman. And I think that begs the question, though, and many people approach us from the outside in, and Black Lives Matter has gotten a lot of attention in the past, 6 to 7 months. What role does the outside nonprofit play? Who is making the good trouble? I know your organization does it in a very objective and structured way. What does good trouble look like as a national landscape, and what attention does good trouble deserve at this point, as many try to really remove the impact of the conversation because people are called agitators or outsiders, all the above? In organizations like your own, what does that good trouble look like, and the impact that is necessary for individuals to be involved when it comes to that good trouble?
Well, I want to begin by just acknowledging the deep sadness and the heartbreak that we all feel. And particularly, John Lewis was a son of Alabama. We adopted him here in Georgia, and, soon to be Senator McGrath, he belonged to the world. But we know he was the son of the South. And when I had the opportunity to be in Selma with Senator Jones, with Mayor Woodfin, when I got to talk to the congressman the night before I spoke at Brown AME, he talked about the work that he had helped me do. When I launched the voter registration effort here in Georgia that was assailed by our local, architect of voter suppression, it was John Lewis who stood up and said that the work we were doing was so valuable and so valid that he was willing to put his reputation on the line. When we launched Fair Fight, the work that we've been doing to lift up the right to vote, not the right to win, but the right to vote, that he was never, ever anywhere but right at our side, if not in front of us on every one of these issues. And it's because he understood that you have to speak with your inside and your outside voice, that those who hold elective office are inside the room when the laws are made, when the rules are changed, when the decisions come into being, but that your outside voice has to be loud enough that they can't but hear you on the inside. And my interpretation of that has been that I don't try to police, no pun intended, or admonish the language of protesters. I don't try to shape their messaging or their delivery, because the language of protest has to come from the core. And as someone who was a protester in 1992 in the wake of Rodney King, and found myself on the political side in 2020 in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Rayshard Brooks and Tony McDade, we have to recognize that it is the obligation of those who sit on the outside to remind those on the inside, but that they are there but by grace, that the election is our decision to let you represent us, to let you speak for us. But if you won't listen to us, then how can you speak? And I think that's what John Lewis taught when he not only would sit in those chambers with, Senator Jones working to make things right, but when he stood on those steps after the murder at the Pulse nightclub and said he was not going to move until good was done, it's knowing that you can have both the inside and the outside strategy. Where I would say, particularly as we talk about the rise of the South, is that nonprofits, organizations, no matter what your characterization, your responsibility is to pick people whose voices speak for you when you can't be there to tell them what to say. And that's why elections are so critical, because we have to trust that they will remember us when power is present. And that's why the census matters, because it decides who gets to be in the room. It's why voting matters, because you get to decide what they say. And it's why re-election matters, but also accountability matters, because it's you making sure they do their work when you're not there watching them. And I think that's the good trouble that we're called upon to be in every single day.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I guess I would ask all this. I'll just share my quick story. Many people don't know that John Lewis was Councilman Lewis before he started. And he gave me a blessing of a lunch not too long ago when I was actually young. And he gave me words of wisdom and said, the toughest thing was city council, because at any point, any place he went, somebody wanted their street paved, somebody wanted their trash picked up, the list goes on. But he said it humbled him to have started in that place as a city councilman. And maybe Senator Jones and all, I'm going to ask everybody, what is that moment? What is that moment that really convicted you to start good trouble? And how has that shaped and formed you as a leader, as a senator of this state, as a mayor, or as a future senator of the state?
It's a great question. And I don't know if there was one single moment. I go back to all the way to high school. I'm older than everybody on this panel by a fair amount. And I was, a product of an era in which school integration was just getting going in Alabama. And we struggled with that. White schools, black schools, combining schools. And I can recall, especially during junior high and high school, trying to be one of those student leaders to try to make sure that we as students did all we could to make sure that everything worked well and we got a good education and we had fun doing it. It was a different time for us. But I think that all of that experiences in high school, because it was junior high when I first went to an integrated school. And those experiences in high school and then formed what happened with me in college. And then I decided to become a lawyer. And I will tell you, as a lawyer, I always wanted to be a trial lawyer. I always wanted to get into courtroom. Everybody, tells me I'm nothing more than, theatrical or dramatic. And I don't believe that, but that's what they say. In any event, I had the privilege one time in 1977 when the first of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing cases was prosecuted by then Attorney General Bill Baxley. I was a second-year law student, and I cut classes to go watch that trial. It was 14 years after those little girls were killed in that bombing. And I saw what public service means and the good that it can come, even if it takes a long time. And I saw the acceptance of a community in 1977 to get the conviction of a single former Klan member. And I never dreamed that 24 years later I would have that opportunity. But that molded me. And then my time in the Senate with Howell Heflin as an assistant U.S. attorney, and then obviously what we were able to accomplish with the prosecution of 2 Klansmen for that church bombing. It really makes you understand, and it brings you down to earth to the way that we're not living up to the creed that we've said in this country, that all people are created equal. This is not a fully just society for all people. And so I think what continues to motivate me are things that happen in my life about that, and then having the opportunity to meet the John Lewises of the world, the Fred Shuttlesworths of the world, the C.T. Vivians, Joseph Lowery's, all of the incredible heroes of the past who are now are saying from above, it is time that the mantle is truly been passed. And it's passed to those on this screen right now. Because we cannot let this historic moment that we're in right now let us get us by. We have got to make sure that we grab this moment and make the necessary changes. There's systemic racism changes that have to be made, not just in law enforcement, but throughout our country. And I was thinking the night that we had some of the violence in Birmingham, Alabama, when a crowd tried to pull down that Confederate monument that Mayor Woodfin was talking about. They couldn't do it. It was just too big. And I was thinking to myself, what an interesting metaphor, because it's important that we remove those monuments. But that crowd couldn't remove a barrier. And we've got to remember and not get distracted completely. The removal of monuments is important. But we can't let that distract us from the real eyes on the prize, and that's removing the barriers that we have to good health care, good education, economic opportunities. So we've got to make this methodical, and we've got to do it the right way. And remember, it's the barriers that we're all working on. Those may be symbols, but now is our time. We cannot let this moment pass. And I am hopeful that I know with folks like that we're having here on this panel today, and the others that are taken to the streets in Alabama and across the country, we're not going to let it happen. I think we're at that moment in time where the changes are going to take place. And I'm so honored to be a part of them. I'm so honored to be there with the folks on this panel, because they are an integral part of the changes happening across America.
Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel?
Well, I've had a number of sort of aha moments in my life. I think the reason I decided to jump into the public realm and try to make a difference for our country stems for me back to 2016. And I was teaching at the U.S. Naval Academy. And I was teaching a number of courses, some national security courses, but one on U.S. government, just basic course. And at the Naval Academy, you have midshipmen from all around the country, from Alabama and Georgia and California and you name it, and all walks of life. So you're teaching everyone. You're seeing really what America is. And I found in my students that during the 2016 election year, a lot of them had lost faith in leaders in our country, both sides. And I also saw the fact that I felt like one political party was not representing what true American values really are all about. And it was at that time that I decided, I got to stand up. I got to do this. I've got to get out of the military, move back home to Kentucky, and run for office to try to make a difference and to move our country in the right direction. And it was just like one of those things where it was aha moment, we're going to do this thing. And it really stems back to this idea of our Constitution itself. The very beginning of it, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, we have to recognize our problems and our issues and the fact that a lot of people don't have the freedom, to be to reach their full potential as Americans because of healthcare, because of the absence of good paying jobs, or the absence of investment in education, all of these things. And we have to recognize that. And then we have to commit ourselves to making it better. And that, I think, is what we need to do, in the case of racial inequality, in the case of all of the issues that we have with healthcare, as I mentioned, because we have to keep working to make our country better. And that, to me, is the reason I jumped into the political realm, into the public realm, because if I could use my background of fighting for this country and working with people from all walks of life to make a difference for our country and move us in the right direction, that's something I can look back on and then say, I made a difference. I mean, that's what this, to me, is all about.
Absolutely. And I'll say this before Randall wraps us up, and I don't tell this story often, but when I had my aha moment, which is a story within itself, Mayor Woodfin was the one I called. He wasn't Mayor Woodfin then. He was counsel. And I was back and forth, and he said, why not, D? If not you, then who? He was very John Lewis in that moment. And my first fundraiser, my first $100 came from that man right there at Rogue Tavern in Birmingham, Alabama, as I ran for city council. So Mayor Woodfin, as you close this out, what was your moment? How did you become the 30th mayor of the city of Birmingham?
Thank you, brother. And let me say this before if I don't get a chance to. There's a lot of humble pie that I've had a chance to take in this dialogue. And so to the Lieutenant Colonel, to Ms. Stacey, Senator Jones, thank you all for your leadership and your passion. I mean, I've learned so much just by being able to listen to you all day. I feel like a student. I've had two moments, so I'll share one of them very briefly, and then I'll share the other one if I have time. The first moment was a student leader, a senior in college, on a college in the Red Clay Hill in Atlanta, Georgia, called Morehouse College. There was a hate crime that took place on campus, and as a student leader, there was a moment where the leadership, the adults on campus, at every level, were attempting to suppress students from speaking out against this. Being a student leader, I felt that was wrong, and so I did some things that I didn't have, that the adults told me we couldn't do. Once we got our moment and had our moment, we got in trouble. And that trouble led to more protests on campus. It led to more activism for me, and it led to our student SGA charter being suspended and then being reinstated. And so there was a lot of moments as a student leader my senior year in college. But the biggest thing I got from that moment is, if there's ever a time where people are trying to suppress others from speaking, that is the time that you're willing to do what's right, even if you get in trouble, even if you get sanctioned for it, because it's the right thing to do. Second moment was literally 6 years ago, standing on the stage, shaking high school graduates' hands as a school board member. And I realized at some point there was a bottleneck on that stage, and I was afforded the opportunity to ask a young person, what are you doing next? And some of them would look me in my eyes and fib, give me a story, make up something, because they didn't want to disappoint me, the adult, in that moment, because they truthfully didn't know what they were doing next. Running for mayor, I wanted to create a runway. I wanted to create opportunity for young people to make sure if I ever had the opportunity again to stand on the stage and ask a young person, what are you doing next? To me, which of the three, but I wanted them to speak honestly about either going to college, going straight into the workforce, or being like the lieutenant colonel here and going straight into the military. those three options, I believe, as mayor, should be one of my most important things I do, creating opportunity for young people. And that is why I ran.
Well, to you all, you have definitely allowed the South to say a lot and got something to say. To a future senator, to maybe and hopefully a future VP, to our continued senator, and to my hero and the mayor, you have been a blessing to me. And if you are ever in the greatest city just this side of heaven called Huntsville, I promise you, we can enjoy some good barbecue. It will be on me. To everybody else, thank you so much. My name is Devyn Keith, and it's been a blessing to be with you all. Take care, peace and love.